Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. I wasn't hearing anything, but I think I'm going to be hearing now.
Oh, okay. Inshallah. This week, inshallah, today we will read from the second point of the 30th Flash about one of the greatest names of Allah, the name of Adl, all just, and it has like more deeper meanings. We see in the universe, Said Nursi, talks about, in this universe, we see, destruction and construction and transformation, incomings and outgoings everywhere, like from atomic level to the cells in our body to the stars. We see this transformation everywhere. But we see all this transformation, but with it, we see a balance everywhere, like from atomic level to the stars, to the cells in our body. And we will talk about that balance. And he connects it to, how, who does this transformation. And then all the way to the end, we see this balance and cleanliness in the universe, and how, Allah also commands us to be clean and to be just like the order and balance and the justice in the universe. And all the way to the end, we see that, Said Nursi connects it to the next life, how they all point to next life, and how they are like a signs for us to see the life in the hereafter. They point and they prove the life in the hereafter. Inshallah, I will start reading. And today we have Colin Turner from England and Mustafa Sunah Hojam from United States, inshallah. The second, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The second point, the divine name of all just. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Wa im min shay'in illa indana khaza'inuhu wa ma nunazziluhu illa biqadrin ma'lum. And there is another thing, but its sources and treasures inexhaustible are with us. But we only send down thereof in due and ascertainable measures. بِقَدْرٍ مَعْلُومٍ, ascertainable measures. One point concerning this verse, and one manifestation of the name of all just, which is the greatest name, the name Adl, and one of the 6 lights comprising the greatest name, like the first point, appeared to me from afar while in Eskshire prison. In order to bring it closer to the understanding, again by means of a comparison, we say the following. The universe is a palace, but it is such a palace that in it is a city which is being constantly shaken by destruction and reconstruction. And in the city is a country which is being continuously agitated by war and emigration. And within the country is a world which is unceasingly revolving amid death and life. But such an astonishing balance, equilibrium and equilibration prevail in the palace, city, country, and world, that it self-evidently proves that the transformations, incomings and outgoings apparent in these innumerable beings are being measured and weighed every moment on the scales of a single being who sees and supervises the whole universe. Inshallah, so this is the introduction part. We shall talk about the ayah and about maybe how this Risale was written in Eskshire prison, and the introduction part. Colin Hojam, inshallah, we can start with your comments, inshallah.
I think, as we did last week, we have to contextualize these terms, these words, especially those from which we derive divine names. And I think it's important that we understand the etymology of the words which are derived from this triliteral root, ayin dal lam, and from which we get nouns such as adl and adala, both of which are often translated as justice. Sometimes I feel that justice is not really the best translation for adl and adala, but this is something that we can discuss further down the line. And adjectives such as adil, which is usually translated again as just or fair. It's important, and I think that Ustad Nursi lays his wares out right from the very beginning, and that is that the Quranic/Islamic concept of adala is something which grows out of the notion of balance. I think it's important that we shouldn't conflate modern notions of social justice, which of course are mediated by our post-Enlightenment way of thinking, with the Quranic notion of balance, of things being in the place for which they were decreed. And that is very much where the Islamic/Quranic notion of justice gets its meaning, gets its depth of meaning. And it's clarified even further in this verse. And there is not a thing but its sources and treasures inexhaustible are with us. But we only send down thereof in due and ascertainable measures. Every entity that comes into existence in this visible world comes into existence with well-planned and well-defined proportions and pre-calculated and well-considered measurements. Things don't simply just, appear or arrive without any kind of preordained shape or form or specifications or proportions. Things are created as though from what Nursi calls immaterial molds, on the basis of abstract and immaterial plans and blueprints. So if we want to find this worldly example, we can think in terms of an architect. And Ustad Nursi himself begins by talking about a palace. So when an architect draws up plans to build a palace, he or she constructs it first in the depths of his own thoughts and imagination. And then he empties those thoughts and imaginations onto paper, or today perhaps onto some kind of computer program, in which all of the considerations concerning length and width, height, volume, capacity, all of the various measurements of the various components of the building are brought together in the form of a plan or a blueprint. And so when the palace finally emerges from the abstract world of the architectural mind, it emerges with the pre-configured measurements and proportions. Everything on the plan and the blueprint has a place and a purpose. And when the palace finally begins to take shape, it does so in accordance with the measurements and the proportions that were recorded and formulated on that blueprint. This is why the verse says, "Illa biqadarin ma'lum." Everything has a qadar which is ma'lum, which is clear and obvious. So if you consider that verse, you will see how it reflects what happens in practice. So in the context of the palace, that which takes on the characteristic of being, of wujud, is given existence in accordance with all of those measurements and proportions and what I would call the precepts of justice, which are inherent in that blueprint. In other words, the architect knows where this particular room will go, where that wall will be built. He or she knows exactly how tall these windows have to be, how heavy the supporting columns must be in order to be able to support the ceilings and not let them fall through. In other words, the architect knows where everything has to go in order to work, in order to achieve its optimal level of functionality. The architect knows that if this column is too small, it's not going to be able to support the floors of the rooms above. The architect knows what must go where in order for the palace to function, in order for the palace not to collapse into a pile of stones. So in short, the architect knows what must go where. And I think this is the key to understanding what Adl really is, before we even get to the discussion of how we translate it. Adl in the Quranic sense means things going in the places that they were meant to go, or things performing the exact functions that they were created to perform. So Adl means things being in their rightful places. And I think we have to use this context, you know, as our opening bargaining chip, you know. The context of the word adl in its Quranic sense is talking about balance, and it's talking about where a thing should rightfully be placed.
Jazakallah. By a single being, as you said at the last sentence, I see that, you know, everything is being measured and weighed every moment on the scales of a single being who sees and supervises the whole universe, as you said, every single thing, right, from atoms to the stars. Everything is where it's meant to be. Everything is, you know, going where it's meant to go, right, in certain measures. So, inshallah, Mustafa Hocam, any comments on this part in the introduction, inshallah?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, bismillah. Yeah, mashallah, what Colin Hocam said is beautiful. And this is actually something that I've been grappling with myself. I mean, we have a huge tradition that discusses these matters, and I have not been able to crack it open yet. I have not been able to get into it sufficiently yet, and I know that Colin Hocam is way more advanced than I am in this. Therefore, I'm going to perhaps like try to open up what he said a little bit, or I ask him to open up a little bit what he said. What I have in mind is this notion of putting everything in their proper place. It is used both to define hikmah, wisdom, and justice, or adl, right? So whether justice is the proper translation or not, we are using it for now. So I was wondering if we could relate the two in the way that we relate knowledge and power with regard to creation. You know, God determines everything in his knowledge, and then he brings it into existence according to that knowledge. So I wondered if we could think of hikmah as as comparable to knowledge, and justice as comparable to power in that notion. And of course, the concepts of qada and qadar, depending on which tradition you are looking at, can be interchangeable, but the meaning is, you know, one relates to knowledge, one relates to power. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that, Colin Hocam.
No, you overestimate my understanding of the whole issue. I know nothing about justice, which is why I tried to move the whole discussion away from, you know, talking about justice, because then we get sort of embroiled in notions of social justice. You know, what are the different kinds of justice, retributive justice, the various other sort of flavors of justice. So you overestimate my ability to talk about these things, but I think you can open up more maybe what you've just said about the fact that all of the names are there. You know, it shows the fact that the names are like the colors of a mosaic, the divine names, and that you cannot extricate one name from the whole, you know, plethora of names without doing a disservice to the divine. Because if you take away wisdom, then you've subtracted one of the most important components, as you said. We glean from what we see of an entity coming into being. We glean not just order and balance, but as you've said, we also glean wisdom. We also are able to derive an understanding of wisdom, because there is wise purpose in the way that things have been placed as they are. So this is why I think talking about Adl outside of the whole constellation of names, and I think that this is what you're hitting on here, the notion that justice only makes sense, or sorry, Adl only makes sense when it's viewed as being part of a constellation. You know, there's this wonderful idea that Nursi gives us of names forming constellations, just as the stars form constellations. And you know, the moving stars, the moving planets move through the constellations, and each planet that moves through a constellation becomes highlighted and becomes understood within the context of that particular, you know, formation of stars. So I think that Adl has to be understood within the constellation of the things that you mentioned, such as justice, power, um, and you know, the various other attributes that you mentioned. So we would say justice, knowledge, wise purpose, and judiciousness. You know, Allah as Hakam as well as Hakim. So we have to see the names as very much working in tandem, working together, or as constellations, which I think is a much more lyrical way of seeing the creation. You know, which is very Nursian in its sentiment. The names forming constellations, and in these particular constellations that we're looking at, the planet that is moving through them is the planet of Adl.
Or the colors of the sunlight, right? I think it's in this note he's using that too, right? When put together they appear, you know, white, and then you can, if you can, you know, parse it out, you can see the different colors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends from the perspective that you're looking at it. But, you know, when we're talking about balance and equilibrium, we are by default also talking about wisdom. And when we're talking about wisdom, we're talking about wise purpose. And when we're talking about wise purpose, we're talking about measurement and qadar. And when we're talking about qadar, we're talking about something else, you know. So all of these things connect with each other. They interlock, you know, like a mosaic. And it's impossible really to, you know, extricate one of them and talk about it in its, you know, to atomize it and to talk about it in its own singularity. It's very difficult to do that without referring to the other, all of the other names.
Yep. And I was also thinking, you know, when we think about everything being in their proper place, we tend to think of, you know, as the first example, that a palace, right, a city, a society, maybe a picture, we look and there is something in us that recognizes balance or harmony and or proportionality that's, you know, hardwired, and we look and we see that one of the words that he uses in Turkish here, and I'm not sure if the translation fully conveys or not, but anyway, he used the words muwazana, mizan, and tawzin, which are translated as balance, equilibrium, and equilibration. You know, I would probably use the act of balancing for tawzin, so which brings us into the discussion of the act itself. And when the act is you know, repeated, insistently repeated, we can even go to a discussion of shu'un, conduct. What I'm trying to get to with this is that palace, that city, that picture, whatever it is, this cosmos is not built once and left as is. It's constantly in motion. And the human instinct, I guess, that at least what I have, is when I see something in perfect equilibrium, perfect balance, perfect harmony, I would be scared of any change in it, any movement, any motion in it. Like, you know, if I build a card house, or I forgot what they call it. There is this game that they put little sticks on top of one another, and then you start pulling things out, out.
Oh yeah, Jenga, I think.
Jenga, yeah, okay,
Yes.
Jenga. If everything is put together and it's standing and it looks fine, if I would be scared to pull one thing out, but what's happening here is there is income and outcome. Things are coming in and things are going out. Things are
Yes,
constantly
yes.
changing, and the equilibrium, the balance is being maintained, preserved as things are changing, which then leads us to see that there is a power that's acting on this, that is keeping things in place, even as things are constantly changing.
Yes, that actually gives it another dimension, doesn't it? It gives it, a synchronic dimension, because everything is happening now. It's not static. It's not something that is linear. It's like four-dimensional. So there are so many different variables, so many different, components to take into consideration, and so many considerations to put in the equation. It's almost beyond our ability to even, conceive of such a structure, something where the balance of all things is continuously being given importance and being brought into operationality. It's almost impossible for us to grasp that, and this can only happen if there is one orderer, one Adl, only one being who is Adl, who is Adl, because only one being can have a purview of the whole of the cosmos. It's impossible that this can be delegated. This does not allow any delegation whatsoever. No partners, no intermediaries, no helpers, no wazara. It's impossible. It's impossible because there are so many considerations, so many things need to be taken into consideration that it is impossible to think of more than one orderer being able to carry this out. And that orderer has an absolute view of the whole of the cosmos, of every single component of the cosmos, simultaneously. So this is also an argument for divine unity and divine unicity as well.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, Mustafa Hojam, what your idea is about the fact that this was written or this was conceived in Eskişehir prison.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
It struck me, he if you're in Eskişehir prison, we know that he was in prison in so many different prisons and under so many different iterations of house arrest.
Yes.
And yet he sat down and he ruminated on the issue of justice. There must be some, deep connection between that and his understanding of qadar as well. The fact that he was able to sit down in Eskişehir prison and rationalize in this way and reflect in this way is also pretty amazing. And I think there is a connection between the fact that, we're talking about justice here and his imprisonment, how much they bleed into each other.
Yes, also Colin Hocam, when you said, Eskişehir prison, even when, for example, when like our nafs gives excuses to us, not to serve Islam, not to do anything, when you are sick, when you are very old and stuff. But, Ustad, when he wrote it, like 30th Flash, first ray and second ray, the 30th Flash, like it's huge, but he wrote it in Eskişehir prison. And
Yes.
when it's very harsh prison, like when to 120 of his students, and when they first entered, like they didn't give them any food for like 12 days, and they were not allowed to go to bathroom, like so, very harsh conditions.
Yes,
That condition, like you would say, okay, like I'm not even gonna read Risale, like okay, but it's so difficult, right? But he, forget about reading Risale. He wrote the whole, 30th Flash, the first ray, second ray, even though he was very strict,
yeah.
under torture and hunger. As you said, I know it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think it's more than interesting. It's absolutely amazing, and it just gives you flashes of his own character, without wanting to go into hyperbole about his abilities or about his greatness. We have to take our hat off to him, and say that someone who was suffering, these grievances at being, first of all, incarcerated on trumped up charges, he must have realized, even though he didn't really articulate it, he must have realized, and others must have known that he realized he was there on trumped up charges. And yet he tried to make the best of a poor situation, if you wish. I don't want to say bad, because nothing is bad ultimately. But as you say, that the fact that he should sit down and write the 30th Flash in such constricting and in such deleterious conditions as being in prison. We have problems sitting down and writing, in the luxury of our own offices, let alone in a prison. But I think it lends the piece an extra poignancy and also an extra meaning.
And my first instinct is to think, the concept of justice that you at the beginning said we should be careful about, right? They are put in prison unjustly. They are being kept there unjustly. The whole society is transforming in ways that are not just in the longer scheme of history. And these are all opportunities to recognize the injustice in what's going on, and then to think about the word justice, or adl, or adala, and the Turkish word for it, of course, is adala, justice. But I'm also thinking that there might be some like further dimension to this. And when Omar said they were there for 12 days without food, not even being able to use the bathroom, etc., etc. So all of these are things that are leading to in a sense, the emaciation of the nafs, the lower soul. And then elsewhere he says the core of a thing becomes stronger in the expanse of the shell. Right, the shell is being the shell is being shaken here, and in a sense, the justice of the situation, or the balance in the situation, is that the balance between the shell, the outside, and the inside is being balanced with the effusions of all these meanings that are being filled into his heart. On the one end, they are being punished and persecuted, right? Yes. On the other hand, they are being bestowed with all these blessings and grace.
Subhanallah. Yes. I mean, outwardly, they are being subjected to torture, but inwardly, they are being prepared. And he was being prepared for the production of one of his greatest works, the 30th Flash is an amazing piece of theological mysticism, if you wish, or mystical theology. It's absolutely amazing, and maybe in a sense that's what was required, so those conditions were required, perhaps. It's just difficult to understand because we live in a world of absolute entitlement, the world in which we live in the 21st century is a world which is characterized by this almost ubiquitous sense of entitlement that people have. This is coming from a different world, this is a missive, this is a letter coming from a different age to us, with a different sentiment, and I think we have to read it in that way, which is why I would have cautioned against, talking about Adl and the Adala as social justice. I'm not saying that there isn't a connection. I think there is a connection, and there is also a place for a discourse on social justice. And of course, this would have been the perfect place for Ustad, to have talked about social justice, but he doesn't do that. That's not really his. I'm not saying that he doesn't hint at it, he doesn't intimate, but that is not his number one consideration here. Whereas for the moderns today, they would use their prison experience as an occasion for a little bit of virtue signaling, maybe. I've undergone such a terrible situation here in prison. My rights have been trampled on. I have these grievances. I have, these woes. I've been maltreated. I've been mischaracterized and all of these things, but he doesn't do any of that. He talks about Adl and Adala in its most raw and authentic form, which is how the Quran presents it to us, as equilibrium, things being in their right place. And that is the starting point for our discourse on Adl. And even if you want to bring into it the notion of social justice, you can do that, but it has to be from a starting point of Adl as equilibrium and things being in their rightful place. And only the Creator knows what the rightful place is. And this is what gives us our mizan, This is what gives us our sense of the ability to arbitrate and to say what is just, what is right.
Thank you, Khulna Hocam. This is also like in the chat. I see Fatih said about most important risales, being written in prison. He says worldly pleasures and distractions are less in a prison, which may be resulting in a higher spiritual state of the heart and mind. Some of the most detailed and deep risales were written in prisons.
Definitely. Actually, there's a lot of things in the chat I didn't notice, didn't see. Lots of things.
It's like here, Mehmet he wrote it in the beginning of the panel. He said, a palace. We see that the universe, Ustad says the universe is like a palace, but inside there is a city. How can be, a city in a palace? And more interestingly, in a city there is a country.
Yes.
And more interestingly, in that country there is a world.
Yes.
I see, like we will talk about it, like for example, like or like in the cells in our body or our body, like the more you go in, right? You go into the palace, you see a palace, but you enter and you see a huge city, right? And you go deeper, and it instead of it gets more detailed and it gets bigger and bigger. You go more inside, right?
Yes.
The creation of Allah.
It's like the Mandelbrot set, isn't it? When you look at the Mandelbrot set and you go in, it gets more and more, the deeper you go, the bigger it becomes. And it's endless, it's never ending. So Nursi was really, really cognizant of this fact. Did you want to read the other chat messages? Because there are interesting ones there.
Jim asks and Mustafa says, what is it? And I guess he asked it when we talked about the name Adl and connecting it to the knowledge and power. He says, what is the significance of understanding each name has its own manifestation compared to there are some names which are merely combination of other names?
I think that goes back to the idea of constellations, doesn't it?
Mm.
And also perspective, you know, nazar, which perspective you are looking from. Perhaps, I'm not sure.
The yeah, I still need to make up my mind, but I'll just say what comes, and then that's hypothetical. But one idea, or one important thing to keep in mind as we talk about names and other related concepts like attributes and conduct, shunat, is that these are manifestations. These are moved from the zat, the entity to which we are attributing them all. But in the entity, these are not separate things. So in the way that if I'm thinking of a, let's say, an artist, right, who paints pictures with oil paint. So this is the artist who paints with oil paint, and then maybe he has an inclination for red. So he uses the color red a lot, and then he paints nature paint. So that's another attribute. So I attributed all these three attributes to the painter, but the artist is one artist. It's just that all of these are related to the artist. So we are seeing the manifestations of the entity in his conducts, and we are seeing the manifestations of the conducts in his attributes, and then we are seeing the manifestations of the attributes in his names, and then we are seeing the manifestations of the names in his imprints, in his althar, right? So all of this is about what we are seeing. And as human beings, this is how we think. We have to categorize. We cannot think without categories. We cannot think without without concepts. But beyond those concepts and categories that we need in order to process information with our intellect, there's only one.
Yeah.
So in a sense, all names are combinations of each other.
Yes. And maybe there is only one name at the end of the day.
Yeah, one great.
You know, yeah, because we can't see unitarily, we can't see only one. We are by default, in a sense, not condemned, but we are destined to see through the lens of multiplicity, because we are children of multiplicity. So if we grasp unity, we grasp it, you know, for a brief instant, and then it goes again. This is our, how can I say, this is our, I can't think of the English word. In Farsi is saranevesht, something that's written on your forehead.
Destiny?
Yeah, destiny. I don't like the word destiny, but yes. Yeah, I suppose it is. It's destiny, yeah. It's we can't be other than that, you know. As you were saying, there is only one, you know. If you have to see past the names and the attributes and the titles and the, you know, the anawin, the shu'unat, and all of those things as only one, that is the key for us to see only one. But it's very, very difficult, because we are products of multiplicity, and we are immersed in multiplicity. So for us, the goal is to see only one, and to love only one, and to worship only one. But it's difficult, because we, you know, we are immersed in multiplicity, which has its place, clearly, because without multiplicity, we can't know what unity is.
And here, you know, when we say multiplicity and oneness, I want to read, inshallah, the following part too. You know, inshallah, Kolnojam, if there are no more comments here.
No, it's just I saw a cherry tree, and I thought someone it's Harun. Using the example of the cherry tree. and pixels being located at the right place is related to the name Quddus. Talking about the aspect ratio of the image again in the right resolution is, this is very, very heavy stuff here. But if we can have these, the chat somehow transported to the WhatsApp group so that afterwards we can reflect on them.
Inshallah.
If that's possible. Because there are interesting things which get said and then get forgotten.
I wanted to say something about the, I mean, if you can go back up the city, palace, country, that section, and you know, Brother Mehmet was also writing about that. I mean, since I'm doing multiple things, I can't read the chats very carefully, but one way to think about that, and there may be more than one ways, but one way to think about that may also be the way we think about the notions of Alam al-Amr, Alam al-Malakut, Alam al-Mulk, the realm of command, the realm of angelic realm, or realm of domination. There are different ways to translate, and the realm of the dominion, right? So these are not things that are like concentric circles, or one being smaller than the other. They're all there. They're all, you know, if you are thinking about Alam al-Amr, you may not even be thinking about space, right? But they are all within each other. They are aspects of the same reality, and this may also be referring to the aspects of the same reality. For instance, in the sense that when we think of a palace, that is the seat of power. That's where the command takes place. And then we move down to the level of the city. We start to think about the organization, the manifestation of this power within a larger realm, and on and on. So we don't have to think of these as one being smaller than the other and one being contained in the other. They may all be contained within each other. They may all be together, different aspects of the same reality. And I think what's really important to highlight there, perhaps before we move on, is that in all these, let's call them domains or realms, the emphasis is on the constant change and transformation, and ingoing and outgoing, or incoming and outgoing movement.
So, Mr. Hojam, I couldn't get the point of when you said implies the organization, the palace. What did you say about the palace?
The palace, we can think of it as the seat of power, right? It symbolizes, or it indicates where power resides, right? And then when we think about the city, that's the manifestation of that power at the level of the society. So we move from the more abstract or absolute to the more relativized manifestation, application, and implications of that power as people move around in the city. When we move to the mamlakat, like country or land, right? We are kind of diluting the human concentration, and we have the rural areas, less people, but they are now interacting with the nature too, etc., etc. So it's the same power, but the way it is reflected depends on, or relates to, the reflector, the mirrors. So it's the manifestation or reflection of that same power, same majesty that is represented in the palace, in its appropriate, proper forms in different domains, in different realms, in the way that we think of, and there are many other ways to think of this, but in the way that we think of the Alam al-Amr closest to God's entity, right? And then Alam al-Malakut, the realm of domination, where we move to, where we get the angels and other spiritual beings involved. And when we think about the Alam al-Mulk, we start to look at the causes and causation and things like
Mhm.
that. But at the end of the day, these are all manifestations of the same absolute power that is represented at the seat of power on the mirrors of the things that exist.
Yeah, this is a heavy concept. It's sort of, you're trying to rationalize multiplicity, and but at the same time do away with it, which of course we can't do. We need both, and yet multiplicity doesn't have any real reality, and yet without it, unity can't be understood. So again, it's a conundrum. It's something that can never really be rationalized or understood. And I don't want to say, you know, I don't want to use an appeal to mystery, but it's something that we can't fathom because we are in it.
We understand different aspects of it in different
Yeah,
states of our own being.
yeah. Which is where I think the whole constellation idea comes into its own there.
Yeah.
You know, there are some names which at some certain times and under certain circumstances become very clear and very obvious to us, and it can actually be all encompassing. But in actual fact, that is only one aspect, even though at that time it may completely monopolize our attention, and it may make us think that there is only, you know, there is only Al-Hakim in existence, or another circumstance may make you think that there is, you know, Al-Muntaqim, there is only the one who takes revenge in existence. But of course, in reality, these things are relational to a certain extent. Many of the names are, apart from the Zati names, you know, many of the names are relational, which shows that they don't have any real existence outside divine unity. And yet we are by default destined to see them, to atomize them, and to see them as separate names with separate domains. You know, mixing with other names sometimes, passing through other names, because this is how we're created. Maybe next week, we can say more about the balance and equilibrium that we see in creation, that exists in creation, you know, despite, as you know, he says here, all of the transformations, incomings and outgoings, and despite the fact that the city is in a country which is being continuously agitated by war and immigration. In other words, the universe is constantly full of flux and fluctuation and you know, alternations of night and day and season and all of these things, various revolutions, various upheavals and tumults. And yet, amidst all of this motion and all of this commotion, there is balance and equilibrium, you know, with perfect order. And that is quite amazing.
Which we recognize even more as our partial will gets into the picture and
Yeah.
seemingly ruins it from in our small world.
Yes. But that's because we think our small world is the only world, you know.
Yeah. And this is and the cleanliness and purification proceeding from the name of Most Holy cleanse and make the universe, so long as man's dirty hand does not interfere. There's no honest in anything. In a way, with I don't know how to put it, but with the disorder we have in our society, maybe in our life, in our personal life, the dirt with uncleanliness, you appreciate the cleanliness and purification of Allah, right? His name's most holy, Quddus.
Mm.
And if it wasn't for this, you wouldn't appreciate it. Just like if it wasn't for the darkness, you wouldn't appreciate the light. With the injustice, maybe in our society, in our life, maybe not putting in things in proper place, you see Allah does it perfectly with our inner.
Yeah, I mean, there's the verse in Quran which says Allah uses one people to check another people's, uses one community to check another community. So it may seem like conflict, and hostility, but conflict and hostility are only part of the story. If you look from far enough above down, you will see, the further when you go up in an airplane, for example, the further you are up, everything down there looks perfectly still and quiet and full of equilibrium and order and peace and tranquility and calm. And the further you go down, when you land and you come into the airport and into the city, you realize that, that wasn't the case at all. We have to realize that in actual fact, everything is mediated by this tawzeen, by this giving of balance, giving of equilibrium to everything, so that even apparent hostility, apparent conflict, mutual hostility and mutual conflict, out of it there is equilibrium and order constructed from that. So the white corpuscles and the red corpuscles in the body, is it the white ones that is it the red that attack the white? I'm not sure. I know nothing about biology at all. When there is an illness, something happens. One corpuscle attacks another corpuscle. There's apparent hostility there, and yet out of it comes order and equilibrium and well-being.
Yeah, I mean, we know. I mean, we manifest and know our Lord in various ways. One of them is knowing through our own incapacities, right? Through our impotence, we know God's absolute powerfulness. Through our poverty, we know God's ghina, self-sufficiency or richness, or wealthiness. But self-sufficiency, I guess, is the best way to translate it. So similarly, from the way that we make our surroundings seemingly unclean, right? We understand the perfect cleanliness and act of cleaning, or the perfect balance and equilibrium and act of balancing that is in the universe, because what we leave there, the ugliness or uncleanliness or imbalance that we leave there does not stay. It is wiped out, wiped away. There is no society, there is no community, the imprints of which has lived forever or will live forever.
Mm-hmm.
All this havoc that we are inflicting upon the nature that we live in, it will, it is finding its own equilibrium.
Yes,
it's
definitely.
Squeezing us out. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When we say this, like when you also connecting the two together, looking at from the plane above, or like from the space to the earth, you see the earth, like from far from the space, you see balance, order, and measurements, right? You look at the sun, moon, and the earth, and it's so peaceful. and you go into the human society, created willpower, certain power and knowledge, and then you go deeper in the human society, you see, hostility, conflict, dirt, uncleanliness, and it's so noisy. But the more actually we go deeper, right, into ourselves, like as you said, like in the human body, or in the more you go to the atomic level, right, you see again the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a kind of barzakh between two domains of order and tranquility. And if we can put ourselves in order, in the right order, then we can join those two. We can be we can manifest the order in the macrocosm as well as in the microcosm. We can join them. We can be a real barzakh of order, rather than a barzakh which is full of contradiction and full of contrariness and full of opposition.
Maybe be, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And the last comment in the chat, Mehmet Abi says, in reality, Allah shows his esmas to himself. Some of us are just viewers with awareness of awareness. And we came from God, and we are about to return to him. So we are in between ilm and qudra, in power. Like here, the awareness, inshallah, may Allah allow us to be aware of all of this.
Inshallah,
and as
inshallah.
to be aware of all those things, inshallah, we talked about in this dars. Inshallah, this was next week, inshallah, we will continue from the name Adl. And today we talked about, how everything is, balanced, and, many other things, and being organized by one single being. We talked about Allah's attributes. Inshallah, next week we will talk about if it had been otherwise, if it had been left to chance and nature, what would happen? And we will give more on the name Adl, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Can you make dua, inshallah, and then we can finish, inshallah.
So did you ask me?
If you can make dua, inshallah.
Oh yeah, sorry. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Oh Lord, there is no knowledge save the knowledge that you give to us, and you are the all-knowing and the all-wise. Al-Fatih.